Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the implications of the funding problems for schools that, on every practical level, represent a move towards the privatisation of even our supposedly state run schools. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, not the video that I intended to do for this Saturday lunchtime, but I was reading an article this morning that really got to me. It was explaining that schools were struggling so much to work out how paying the rising energy bills that they're asking parents to plug the funding gap. Now, bear in mind that in the UK, it's only domestic energy prices that are capped, not business or industrial use. That means that public services have no protection against the rampant profiteering driving our cost of living crisis. Schools, hospitals, libraries, all getting energy bill rises that massively outstrip the domestic rises, and they're unaffordable for millions. And the likes of schools, they don't have huge reserves of cash to get through this period. I know that Liz Truss says that she's going to be doing something for business rates as well, but it's been a little bit vague for me and not all that long term. It doesn't even last a year, and it doesn't sound to me like it'll be enough. Schools are having their energy bills go up in a couple of weeks. What we're not seeing is the government saying, oh yeah, okay, more funding for you. And if you think the original increase for domestic users was going to be bad, business energy rates were going up by a way higher percentage. After all, if energy companies are going to have their grotesque profits on domestic supply curtailed, you bet they're going to try and fleece businesses to compensate. But state schools are not businesses. They pay the business rate, but they can't afford this. Being honest, they haven't been able to for years. As some may know, I was a teacher before I started shouting at the internet in the last college where I worked full time. Winters were fairly cold. The college couldn't afford to keep the site warm during the winter as you would like, so the heating was used, but sparingly. Now, as a science teacher, you'd better believe that I used to save all the practicals that needed hot water baths and Bunsen burners for the winter. I can't imagine what their budgeting must look like now. Because you can sacrifice a little bit of heating, you can't sacrifice electricity. The lights need to be on. The computers need to be on. You know how things turn out. The college or school has to sacrifice something, so it has to sacrifice, say, staff. I've seen it ever since the Tories came to power. My teaching career was very much in two halves. I became a trainee teacher in 1997. That's the year Labour came to power. I saw funding flooding into education. In my formative years, heads of department would tell me how much more money they were getting now than a few years ago. I was still a teacher in 2010. I then saw for myself it being bled away over the next decade. For those who genuinely don't get the difference between Labour and the Conservatives in government, it is like night and day. And the night of Tory rule is freezing cold and full of vampires. I've seen what schools do when the budgets are tight, which the Conservatives have made sure that they were. They cut down on support staff. They try and recruit a larger proportion of less experienced teachers than is sensible. Their salaries lower. And the cuts made have a negative impact on the life chances of the students. Of course they do. They're particularly harsh on those from less affluent and less aspirational backgrounds, thus crushing attempts at social mobility. It's also long been the case that schools have asked parents to fund things, little things, to top up the coffers because the government aren't providing that funding. Because the thing is that the government are way more blatant with schools than with the NHS. Like with the NHS, they have to pretend that they're funding it well. So what they do is they pump absolutely loads of money into the system. So people can't say, oh, you're drawing the funding. No, we're putting in more funding. Look, each year funding is going up. But that they insist the NHS has to spend a lot of it on outsourced private providers. So although it's going to the NHS, it's going straight back out again. Rather than letting the NHS use the money to deliver the service themselves at lower cost. It's abhorrent. It means the budget makes it look like record sums are being spent on healthcare, but it's a lie. But with schools, they don't even bother with that. They just reduce the funding for education because the media aren't calling it out. Maybe there's only so many voters with children of school age at any one time, but everyone needs healthcare. I don't know. I would have thought there was still a lot of key voters with who are parents of school age children. But this latest blow to schools is real soft privatisation in action. You know, the article explains the problems with rising energy bills. We can appreciate that. It then talks about PTAs, parent-teacher associations, and school leaderships trying to raise funds directly from parents. Now you can see how this works, can't you? You've got a school in a poor part of town. Most of the kids are from the poorer backgrounds. Then you've got another school in a more affluent catchment area. Most of their kids are from like the upper middle class homes. Which one's going to raise the most money from parents? Which one will be able to maintain their educational programmes best? Which one is going to give their students the best opportunities in life? It's no accident, this. The Tories love it when the public funds what our taxes are supposed to be paying for. Jacob Rees-Mogg said he loved the idea of food banks, for example. And they do love it. They love it because it widens the gap between rich and poor. When the government funds something, that funding has to be allocated to where it'll do the most good. That means focus largely on the most vulnerable, those most likely to be left behind without support. Proper funding for schools will mean kids from poorer backgrounds getting better qualifications, being able to go to the best universities or getting the best apprenticeships, maybe even developing the skills to be the next generation of business or political leaders. A nightmare for the Tories. It approaches the sort of meritocracy that they hate so much. It means that people from impoverished backgrounds can compete for university places and jobs with their own cretinous, chinless but privileged spawn. Because this won't happen ordinarily, because you imagine it like early years, you imagine the several years before a kid even goes to school, right? So parents who've not necessarily had the best education themselves are not necessarily the best place to boost those kids. Other parents will have their kids reading Shakespeare before they even go to school. Schools have to be able to allow those who missed out on those early years skills training from their parents to catch up. That needs funding. If you don't have the funding, you can't do it. They remain left behind. You know, but when you've got things part funded by the public, that funding is disproportionately going to the already privileged. You ask parents to fund something, and most parents want the best for their kids, so they help where they can. But it's only those on high incomes that will be able to do anything significant. And this is especially the case right now, because right now, people's disposable income is going down. Everyone's is going down because of the higher cost of living. So there's a pincer movement in effect here. And these parents that are able to pay something to the schools, they want the best for their kids. No bugger else's, their kids. So they'll not just cough up because the school asks for it. They'll cough up for something that they can see helps their child. So even that funding will be disproportionately for the most privileged kids, even within a single school. And if this sort of thing is allowed to carry on, it'll drive a much bigger gap between rich and poor, and the sort of thing no future government can reverse. You know, the kids finishing school now have had their entire education under the Tories. Many of them have had opportunities permanently denied now. And they know that they produce rubbish education. Liz Truss herself, during the Tory leadership contest, said how crap her education was. Her education was under Thatcher's years of government. You know, but you take science, for example, because this is what I spent most of my time teaching. It's very expensive. It's very expensive. It's very important because STEM-based careers are quite well paid. So you want kids to have good STEM education. But delivering science is expensive. You not only need the teachers, but you need the labs and equipment. Now, I can tell you the difference in labs between rich and poor schools is something to behold. I've taught in some labs where you could hardly do anything. Practicals like, well, what can you do? And the equipment as well is expensive. And there's a lot of consumable equipment needed. Then you need lab technicians on top as well. A science department is very expensive to run. What are we looking at here? A future where schools in already affluent areas get a good grounding in science because they have the labs, they have the equipment to see and experience the practical activities underpinning the theory they're being taught. They have the doors to lucrative STEM-based careers open to them. Then poorer schools, who can barely afford the kit to run the government prescribed practicals but nothing else. working out of textbooks, getting no deep understanding of the subject at all, not even wanting that understanding because it all seems a bit boring. Cannot tell you how mad this makes me. Some of the suffering that the Tories inflict can be eased as soon as they're replaced. Some things can be changed overnight. Some things take a bit longer. Some things can't be changed at all. When you deliberately fail in education, you are stealing the futures of millions of citizens, a future that no future government can really give them back. You know, the last Labour government put a lot of funding into Skills for Life, so people, working age or beyond retired even, could go back and get some training, but it's much more difficult then because they have to deal with things like fitting it around their domestic things, childcare and so on, work. It's much harder. Someone leaving school now with a much poorer education than they'd have had under a better government has had a potentially bright future stolen from them. A small number of truly exceptional people will be lucky enough to find their niche and do well. Don't point to me at the odd person that had this terrible education somehow pulled through. They are less than the 1%. The vast majority will have had doors closed to them permanently. And it's not only cruel to them, but it deprives us as a society. Because with opportunities for all, we'll get the best possible people running our society. Instead, we get Reginald Chinless III Esquire running our industries and public services into the ground. We get the likes of Dido Harding being given 37 billion quid to piss up the wall. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.